Hi, welcome to Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, the show that exposes the ongoing world communist revolution and pushes back. Please subscribe to the show, like and share the show. We need to get the word out as far and wide as we possibly can. Well, today I'm going to talk about New Zealand, but I think what I have to say will be very relevant to my friends in Australia, through the South Pacific, really every Western country, because the same communist scams are being pulled everywhere. Right now we have a big problem in the South Pacific. The Communist Party of China is threatening to invade Taiwan. They've also threatened Japan. They almost have South Korea compromised as part of their empire already. We're in danger of losing South Korea. So you've got a big general freak out in India, Australia, Taiwan, the Philippines. They're all looking at the Communist Party of China and wondering what's going to happen. If Taiwan is invaded, that's going to fill the South Pacific with refugees. It's going to start an arms race or a general surrender, one or the other. We'll see what happens. But right now, Australia, to its credit, has put in an order for 4 nuclear submarines. I wish it was 40, but 4's a start. Now they're going to be patrolling Australia's waters to deter the communist Chinese. And by extension, they will also protect New Zealand to some degree as well, and other countries like Papua New Guinea, etc. Now, our grateful Prime Minister, the Marxist Jacinda Ardern, has said because New Zealand passed anti-nuclear legislation in the 80s, banning nuclear-armed and nuclear-powered vessels from our waters, Australia's new submarines will not be welcome.
Certainly they couldn't come into our internal waters. Our legislation...
They will not be allowed to enter New Zealand waters. Our best friend Australia, our ally in many wars, is now being told the weapons they are using to defend themselves are not welcome in New Zealand waters. So there's a background to this, a deep background. For many years, Australia and New Zealand were allied with the United States in the Australia-New Zealand-United States Military Alliance, known as ANZUS. And it was a very deep alliance. New Zealand and Australia were both very grateful to America for saving them from Japanese invasion during World War II. And it was an alliance designed to stop Soviet expansionism and to keep the peace in the South Pacific, and to a large degree it was pretty successful. That all changed in 1984 when a Labour Party government was elected and the new Prime Minister David Lange banned nuclear warships, nuclear armed ships from New Zealand waters and harbours. Now that was enshrined in law in June 1987 with the New Zealand Nuclear Free Zone Act. It was a very popular policy with a lot of New Zealanders, not so much at the time, but even a lot of conservative New Zealanders now think it's great that we stood up and, you know, that we opted out of the nuclear arms race, etc. And New Zealand school kids are told that this is one of the great historic moments in New Zealand history when we basically stopped the Americans bringing their warships into our harbours. But I have a very different view of what happened. I'm sure a lot of Kiwis, New Zealanders will initially not believe what I have to say. It runs very counter to the narrative. But I think with a bit of research, they'll find that the story is pretty darn plausible. And I'm saying it now because many of the actors involved, like former Prime Minister Helen Clark, like former trade union boss Ken Douglas, are still alive. And they played a big part of this, and they should be held accountable. They should be asked about this while they can still defend themselves and answer back. I'm sure they'll duck the questions, but at least they should be given the opportunity. In the 1970s and 80s, New Zealand's pro-Soviet Communist Party, the Socialist Unity Party, was extremely powerful in New Zealand. They achieved this by taking over almost all of the New Zealand union movement. They controlled every major union in the country, with one or two very minor exceptions. SUP comrade Bill Anderson ran the union movement in the major city in New Zealand, Auckland. Ken Douglas ran the movement nationwide from Wellington. He was the president of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions and the leader of the Socialist Unity Party at the same time. All around the country, the Socialist Unity Party controlled unions everywhere. They also made a major effort to infiltrate the New Zealand Labour Party. New Zealand had two main parties at the time. They had the National Party, which was sort of conservative, and the Labour Party, which was sort of socialist. right? So they went for the Labour Party because the Labour Party was deeply affiliated to the unions. The unions had block voting rights in Labour Party conferences. They controlled thousands of votes. You know, the Engineers Union or the Northern Distribution Union, they would actually vote in Labour Party conferences so they could determine who got elected to the Labour Party presidency, the Policy Council, the National Executive, etc. And also had a lot of influence in who became members of Parliament. One stage, former SUP member Bob Harvey, who was the mayor of Waitakere in Auckland, helped elect David Longy. He was a PR man, a public relations man, and he helped to elect David Longy to the leadership of the Labour Party, and David Longy became the Prime Minister. Now, the Labour Party Policy Council at the time included SUP member Rob Campbell and SUP allies like members of Parliament Jim Anderton and Helen Clark. The party's executive was similarly infiltrated. Margaret Wilson, a very close affiliate of the SUP, became the Labour Party president, and in 1987 she took a Labour Party delegation to the Soviet Union, one of the first times that had ever happened. Labour Party Vice President Ruth Dyson was very, very close to SUP leader Ken Douglas and his partner Marilyn Tucker. In Auckland, members of Parliament Jim Anderton, Helen Clark and Marion Street and Matt Rata were very close to the SUP. In Wellington, it was Sonia Davies and Graham Kelly. In Christchurch, it was Ruth Dyson and Larry Sutherland, who I'm told was the MP for Avon, who I'm told was a full card-carrying member of the Socialist Unity Party. They had Greenham Common in Britain, a big occupation outside a US military base. They had marches through Rome and Paris and Berlin, thousands of people waving banners, peace in Europe, end NATO, get America out of Europe. And of course this is all run from the Soviet Union by the local communist parties in those countries, because the goal was very simple. If they could disband NATO, there was no opposition to a Soviet invasion of Western Europe and Britain. And that's what they wanted to do, because they knew if they could do that, they could isolate the United States and they would be 80% towards their goal of world domination. So this is the time to stand up, New Zealanders. This is time to get rid of the anti-nuclear policies, to become proud part of the Western Alliance again, to stand up against the Communist Party of China. This is the mission of our time. So thanks for watching the show. Please share it. Please pass it around. Thanks so much for caring about your country and your future.